It's July 2020, and I'm sitting in a darkened room that used to be my brother's dining room. The table has been replaced by a hospital bed, and on that bed lies my dad, frail and small. I've pulled a chair up next to him, and in a ritual we've perfected at this point, I put my palm on the bed beside him, and without saying a word, he puts his hand on mine. And I look over to the other side of the bed, and my big brother is mirroring me, holding my dad's other hand. And then I look over at the table, and I see my Bluetooth speaker, and I ask it, "Are you ready to read?" And I hear my sister's voice answer, "Yes." We loved my dad reading to us when we were kids. There was this book, "Papa, Please Bring the Moon Down to Me," or something, where the dad in the book gets this preposterously large ladder and climbs all the way up to the moon so he can bring it down for his daughter. And my dad dutifully read to us every single night, well after we learned to read for ourselves, and we got to pick the books. So he endured chapters and chapters and chapters of Sweet Valley High without complaint, all the way up until I was 11 and my sister was 13. 6 weeks before that night in the darkened room, my dad was living in an assisted living facility. He had a breakdown years before from which he never really recovered. He was 73 years old. He insisted on going to the emergency room for something that didn't seem to me like an emergency. It was a pandemic. But he went, and someone saw something in the way that he was moving, and so they ordered a CAT scan, and that's when we found out that he had a brain tumor. I immediately packed a suitcase for a trip of an indeterminate period of time. I was going to go to Cincinnati, where my brother and my dad lived, until he got better or until he didn't. And 17 hours of road trip later, I arrived to the hospital and I see him on the bed, so thin. I mean, he was already thin, but he was 6'2" and only 124 pounds. So I go out in the hallway and I call my sister and I said, "You need to call him." And she said, I know, I'll call him. And I said, seriously, you need to call him. And she said, "I don't know what to say." And I said, figure out something to say, like, you need to call him, he needs us. And we go back and forth like this, and we end the conversation unresolved. And so I go back into the room, and I look at him, and I look out the window, and I'm racking my brain for a way for them to connect, like they need to connect. And then I remember, and I pick up my phone, and I text her, "Why don't you read to him?" And so I set up my Bluetooth speaker for the first time, and I hear her voice pour out of it. Cannery Row in Monterey in California is a poem. We moved my dad from the hospital to my brother's house, and my sister-in-law and my brother and I become his full-time caregivers. And every day I ask him, "Do you want Julie to read to you?" And every day he answers yes. I set up the speaker, and her voice fills the room again. One night, I'm walking the family dog around the neighborhood, and my sister-in-law calls me and says, "I think you need to come home now. I think that this is the end." And so I race home, and I take my place in the chair beside the bed in the darkened room, and I listen to my sister's voice. She says something like, "I know I have savored the hot taste of life, if only for a small and forgotten time." And she keeps reading and reading and reading, and we're suspended there in this ceremony of grief and loss and mourning and connection and love and ending, and it is silent except for her voice. And in that moment, in that space, she finishes the book. And so I say goodbye to Julia, and I say goodnight to my dad, and I leave the room. And he closes his eyes and never opens them again. I think a lot about that night, that darkened room, and how even though she didn't have the words, because of a book, he still had her. Thank you.